Excellent. Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our astronomy night here at the Intrepid Sea, Air and Space Museum. And hello to everyone tuning in at home as well. My name is Alicia Siegel. I'm the producer of public programs here at the Intrepid Museum. And I'd like to welcome you all formally to our free Friday and astronomy night. Very glad you all could show up, and so many of you did. So great to be here. Everyone, one more round of applause for that. All right, I'm so glad we're having fun. We've got so much fun stuff going on here tonight. Activities, hopefully you saw some of those demonstrations down in the hangar. We've also got some telescopes and friends from the Amateur Astronomers Association out there on our flight deck a little bit later. And in just a minute, you are going to hear from our special guests right behind me, Mr. Mike Massimino and Mr. Fred Hasie. But before we get to that, everyone, did you know that this year is actually the Intrepid Museum's 40th anniversary?
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday! Way back in 1982, everyone, this amazing aircraft carrier was rescued from the scrapyard, and it has since been converted into a world-class museum that is now part of the fabric of New York City. So we are celebrating all year long with our free Fridays and movie nights. We've got exhibits, we've got special programming just like this one. Also, if anyone has seen online, our spectacular virtual astronomy live program every month with our partners at nasaspaceflight.com. Anyone ever seen that? Any fans? Virtual astronomy live? Yeah, all right. And also, plus we've got some special 40th anniversary programs as well that are taking you inside of some of the coolest stuff in our collection. So keep your eyes peeled for more of those. But without further ado, the reason you all are here, of course, I would like to welcome to the stage, right behind me here, we have two amazing people that need no introduction, but of course I'm going to do it anyway. Our moderator for the evening, Mr. Mike Massimino, and of course our infamous Apollo 13 astronaut and subject of the new autobiography, Never Can Fail, Mr. Fred Hasie. Now, Mr. Hasie started his NASA career as a research pilot before serving as backup lunar module pilot for the Apollo 8 and Apollo 11 missions, and as the lunar module pilot for the notorious Apollo 13 mission. He also was the backup spacecraft commander for the Apollo 16 mission, and was meant to command the Apollo 19 mission until its cancellation. His book, Never Panic Early, shares intense and incredible highlights from commanding our revolutionary space shuttle Enterprise right behind you. How cool is that? During its approach and landing tests, to surviving a nearly fatal accident during an air show. And it takes readers through the ups, downs, and unexpected turns of his career. So as a reminder, we will be doing a book signing right after this presentation, but let's get right to it. So everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mike Massimino and Fred Hasie.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. Fred, thank you especially for being here. What a thrill for me to be up here with you. It's quite an honor for me. And the book's great. Congratulations to you and to Bill, who's here, help you write it. But a great book here. And there's so many things that we can talk about. I think almost any aspect of your life, which is documented here, is something that we could spend a lot of time. The stories you had that I just heard here these last few minutes are absolutely amazing. So we'll get to as many as we can. But if you want more, this book is available, and also your website.
Some people got the book that are space fans, and they said it was too short. So I created a website, www.fredhasie.space, and it has narrative, and behind the narrative, pictures and archival data, where I collected a lot of archival data that will be on that website that kind of goes across chronologically, but that doesn't match the book exactly chapter for chapter. But you get more information for those that are real space fans.
So there you go. We'll try to hit some highlights here for a while, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So, Fred, why don't we start kind of from the beginning? Grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi. Probably at that time, no idea where life was going to take you. All these amazing things that you have done up to the present day, including the book. You could have never anticipated any of that. But tell us some of the highlights that happened and your journey, because it wasn't a straight journey, right? You went to you went to junior college, and then you joined the Marine Corps, and there you go. And take us through some of the highlights from your early life that led you to becoming a pilot, becoming a test pilot.
Okay, but Biloxi was a very small town, a number of small towns along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, 14,000 population, and very young. I started war because the World War II had come along, and all at once Keesler base opened in went to Gulfport, and the small town was inundated with people walking around wearing khaki uniforms, because over 100,000 airmen moved in being trained in World War II, and I noticed they all needed shine shoes. So I got a box and 2 polished cans, a couple of them, and a brush and a rag to buff them, and sold shoe shines for a nickel. And that seemed like much, but this is in the early 40s, and a nickel would get you 5 Tootsie Rolls, a Hershey bar, a cold drink, so that was great. And then I became a newspaper boy and earned more then. I earned $17 a week. I had 170 papers, customers, and so I moved up in the world. And then I got interested in journalism. That's really what I thought my career was going to be. I got interested in high school working on a newspaper, the high school newspaper, as sports editor. And first community college I went to for 2 years, majored in so-called journalism. I was editor of the paper 1 year and planned to continue that career, but the Korean War had come along, and I decided to serve my country. I had 3 members of my family, including my dad, who was on a minesweeper in the Pacific and got sunk. My dad survived. And I had an uncle that didn't in Europe, and another Marine uncle on 2 campaigns in the Pacific. So I said I should serve my country. And I joined the Naval Aviation Cadet Program because my dad said, join a program that will get you a commission. You become a commissioned officer. And I finished high school and then junior college. I finished high school at 16 years old, and I finished junior college at 18. So the only service I could go into to get the commission was the Naval Aviation Cadet Program, the NAVCAD program. So I was on my way to become an aviator, which my dad wasn't too happy with. He was a ship Navy guy, and he actually thought I should go into submarines. Rickover was getting big in submarines then, Admiral Rickover. And so he was disappointed first that I went to fly in an airplane. And was going to become a naval aviator, a commissioned ensign. And along the way, unfortunately, I got to advanced training, and they were going to put me in seaplanes. And I decided that then I'd become a Marine cadet. And so I could get fighters or bombers or attack airplanes. So that's when I ended up in the Marine Corps. And VMF 533, 1 fighter squadron, and then I ended up in the 2nd VMF 114. It was another fighter squadron. And finished my time in the Marines. I got the idea of becoming a test pilot. So that required more credentials, resume-wise, from what I'd read in books about the early pioneers and the X-series aircraft. I knew I needed a technical degree, preferably an engineering degree. So I did that. I decided to go back to school and went to the University of Oklahoma, and primarily there because it had conveniently a fighter squadron within the Air National Guard. So I actually transformed my commission from Marine Corps to Air Force to join the Guard Squadron so I could continue flying high-performance aircraft while I was in college, and for 3 years to get an aeronautical engineering degree. And so I really have 3 discharges. I have a discharge as a Navy cadet, a discharge as a U.S. Marine, and then a discharge from the Air Force, because in 1961 I was recalled in the Ohio Guard unit into the 2nd Berlin crisis during the Cold War period. So I served in 3 different services. But at any rate, finished Oklahoma and thinking about what to do next, and had the idea of this test pilot. And my squadron commander, Stanley Newman in Oklahoma, recommended I join NACA, N-A-C-A. This was the predecessor to NASA, the NASA, and it was heavily involved in all its centers, more and toward aircraft and enhancing performance, enhancing safety, that kind of thing. And before my graduating period, it became NASA. The space program evolved, of course, with Sputnik and the Russians' activity that was making us look bad. And so the U.S. set off on a space program with Mercury established. And by the time I joined NASA in 1959 at Lewis Research Center as a research pilot, they had picked the first original 7 astronauts. Now, frankly, I and others at that point that were in the flying business didn't necessarily think that was the thing to do. We looked at Mercury as a vehicle. It was obviously a novel thing to go in space and kind of prove humans would survive in space. But there wasn't much piloting with the Mercury capsule. And we were pilots, and we wanted something we could control and command and, you know, have that kind of activity. And also didn't know that that would be the end. Maybe they'd fly Mercury and do their thing, and that'd be it. That'd be all there was to the space program. Well, obviously that evolved differently with John F. Kennedy in office and wanting to do something to get back ahead and show us ahead of the Russians with the formation of the Apollo program. In the meantime, I wanted to move also from Lewis to the Mecca of flight tests for NASA, which was at Edwards Air Force Base at Flight Research Center. And that's where they had the X-15 program at the time, and after 3 years I managed to transfer there. Neil Armstrong was ahead of me 3 years. Neil had also started at Lewis Research Center as a NASA test pilot. He had gone on to Edwards, he got to fly the X-15, and had gone into the astronaut program. And I was still not quite sure I wanted to become an astronaut, and Neil came back and visited once back at Flight Research Center, and Don Malik, another pilot, and I cornered Neil and said, "Neil, what's it like being an astronaut?" And Neil said, "Well, you sit in a lot of meetings, you sit in a simulator a lot, and it's not much good flying." Because he was thinking of our days at Edwards, where we flew almost every day and flew a multitude of different kind of aircraft. 1 month in my logbook I used to go back and talk about the old days at Edwards. Back at Flight Research Center, I picked 1 month where I flew 9 different types of aircraft, 3 different test programs, and so this astronaut program wasn't that. And I had to think hard, but what convinced me was 2 things. One, whether we were going to get to fly the X-15 or not, which I'd have loved to fly, I was about 3 down in seniority in the office, so I knew I would never get, and then we went by seniority as to how you moved up to get to fly the X-15. I knew I'd probably never get there before that program ended. And the other thing was Apollo had evolved by this time, and with the Apollo Lunar Missions, and I said, well, going to the moon would be a pretty exciting adventure. So I said, well, I'll apply, and I did. It was accepted in 1966 to move to another center, which for me was like no pay raise. I just kept the same GS rating and moved to another center down in Houston to join the astronaut program.
And that was in, you were group 5, right? So you were the fifth group selected. And that, where we now went in 19, what year is this?
66.
1966. So this must, you know, I was selected by NASA in 1996, 30 years later. It was very exciting to be there. But I can only imagine what was it like walking in the door there in 1966. So this is, Gemini is going on at this point, right? Mercury's over, Gemini's going on, and you guys are getting ready to go to the moon. What was that like, walking in the door and being there at that time?
Well, the way it was set up was very much like it is today. There's a rookie training period. And
Did they call you ass cans?
No, they didn't call us ass cans.
They called us astronaut candidates. They weren't so sure when they hired us.
Yeah, right.
You guys were astronauts from the start. That's good.
But they had a program laid out for about 12 to 15 months of training of various sorts, jolly field trips, some classroom, etc. And the busyness was, and the schedule pressure was such that they needed more hands covering the waterfront. So they really curtailed our training in that light at about 9 months. And we got then assigned as support crew. My first support crew assignment was with Ed Mitchell, who landed on the moon on Apollo 14. Ed and I were assigned to Jim McDivitt, who was slated to pilot the first lunar module in Earth orbit, orbital mission, which was Apollo 9. And Ed and I went to see Jim in his office and said, you know, what do you want us to do? He had very simple instructions. He said, I want you to go at Grumman, and I want you to make sure I got a good limb to fly. And that was it. That was our marching orders. So Ed and I lived most of the next 14 months at the Grumman plant out here on Long Island at Bethpage.
Woo,
And,
Bethpage!
During that was intensive, incredible schedule pressure. Grumman in 1967 test operations on limbs that were in the flow in manufacturing and subsystem development and testing went on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In 1967, had only one planned shutdown day, Christmas Day. That was it. We lost one shift in February from heavy snow where one shift couldn't get to work. So we shut down briefly to get the next shift in and go to work. But that's the way the schedule pressure was in the work activity. Very challenging, but also very hard on people and families. I really appreciate the sacrifice made by so many people in the program at that time to get the job done, because it was intense. And just continual schedule pressure to get through it. Same thing was going on out on the West Coast with the command and service module development, which I was never involved with. And of course, it was magnified when we lost the crew on the launch pad. We killed the crew on the launch pad on Apollo 1. And they had not just the same schedule pressure, but also regrouping with redesign and rework on the command module to make it safe to get it ready for the next flight. So the pressure was even more intense out in North American aviation on the West Coast and their subcontractors handling that on top of everything else. So it was that kind of days. I ran tests sometimes. I probably slept on a limb, I figured 2 or 3 weeks. There's a test activity, go around the clock. First landing radar test I did on the limb went 23 hours straight. I did a landing radar test that was 27 hours straight. So if we got
slept in the spacecraft.
I just laid on the floor. Came to a halt in the testing procedure. I just lay down on the floor. If I knew it was going to be potentially a spacecraft problem, I would actually join a group up on the mezzanine with engineers, and we'd discuss what now the procedure was going to do to troubleshoot, try to get to the source of the problem. So that's the kind of business that was going on, like I said, around the clock. Forever. Now, Ed and I shifted. We needed to occasionally go home and see our family and change our underwear. So we would fly a 38 back to Houston, but one of us was always stayed. We always had one of us at Grumman during that whole period. You will find that, incidentally, my daily diary of that period in the website. When I said I put archival data, it was that kind of stuff you'll find on the website during that period.
Yeah, I find it interesting because you spent your years as an astronaut. It's not just flying in space. It's figuring things out. And there's no glamour involved there. Sleeping in the spaceship all hours, being away from your family.
Right.
And that's really what the core of the job is. It's that type of work, which you know, people see you fly in space, so that's really cool. But it's really a lot of hard work, dedication, hard on the family, and so on. So thank you for doing that, Fred. It was key to getting us here.
I feel blessed to have been a part, really, in a terrific program.
See, you can clap. You were doing that as a backup for Apollo 9.
Right,
And
support crew.
Support. So different than backup. Support.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then from that, you went on to, was that your next assignment to be the backup for 8?
On 8.
Which is different because which I found reading the book. You were you guys backups meant you were part of the crew. Like you were ready to step in.
Well, we were
right
crew
at the last
ready.
minute.
We were a crew ready to fly. Because the problem was, if you didn't make the launch date, you're going to have to wait for the moon to go around a month to get back to the right spot to launch and hit the landing site with the right lighting conditions. So we were going to launch. If you had to, in those days, we could have changed out the whole crew the week of launch, and it wouldn't have mattered because we trained equally. And that was another problem for us from being away from home, because everything we did in training wasn't where we lived. The The simulators we trained on were at Kennedy Space Center. We lived in Houston. We did geology field trips all over the country, and some Hawaii, Iceland, wherever. And the spacecraft we tested in were at the factories or down at Kennedy. So we had very little time with families at home. So it was really a hardship that way, even when you're on a crew assignment. And 8 was the hardest training cycle for me for 2 reasons. I'd spent so much time in the limb, I knew it down to almost what pins and a 48-pin connector went to what, with the troubleshooting and the testing I'd been involved with, which wasn't needed to fly it. But I'd never been in a command module, not even sat in one. And now I was on Apollo 8. It was a mission that didn't have a limb. It had only the command module to go to the moon the first time on that Christmas in 1968. So I had a lot of learning to do to learn the command module that I might have to fly. And also the mission time was short, training time. For the first 6 weeks, we trained for the wrong mission. We were going to do a big Earth orbital mission, go up to about 4,000 miles altitude, and do a set of rendezvous with the lunar module. So that was the planned mission. And then after about 6 weeks, that's when NASA decided we're going to the moon. So we had to throw the flight plan that was being developed at the time, a lot of the contingency procedures that would be if you were out about the moon, you had to throw all that in a trash can and start over and start our training, basically, for the specific mission now we're going to fly all over. So it took 6 weeks out of our, what I call our training cycle. So, and I was pressured to also learn the command module, at least the part I had to know. So that was the toughest training assignment I had, was Apollo 8. The backup crew, incidentally, I was with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. We were the backup crew on 8. The prime crew was Frank Borman, Bill Anders, yeah. And so anyway, we were the backup on 8.
So what was backup from 8? Was there the possibility of you going on 11? You were backup for 11 as well, and then assigned to 13.
Yeah.
So, but 8 must have been really cool, because as you said, that was really the first time people left low Earth, left the planet for real. When those guys did that, that must have been quite a time to be involved with that mission, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, it was developing a lot of new procedures like lost comm. What if you lost comm with the ground? There was some navigation capability in the command module simulator, not simulator, the vehicle, with a program that you could do sightings on Earth and Moon, and you could navigate, but not as accurately as mission control could do with the bigger computers. And TOW was the contract that primarily did that analysis, to do all the mid-courses to get back and forth. But you had to worry about like lost comm. You're going to be on your own out at the moon. And of course, there was a concern of doing it the first time with only one flight that had fully tested the command module on the, particularly the service module engine, the SPS engine. Because if you're in lunar orbit and that engine doesn't work, you're going to be in lunar orbit a long time. So there was a little concern about that, doing that just on the second time this vehicle flew. So it was some risk in taking that, but that was one way to hold the schedule and still make the landing as intended before the end of the decade.
It seemed like quite a decision to change that flight, as you mentioned, from what you were going to do to now we're going to the moon.
Right.
They did it successfully at the end of 1968. And you were backup for the command module, and then your next assignment was backup on 11 for the lunar module, I would assume. Is that
right? I backed up Buzz Aldrin, who ended up flying 11 and landed on the moon. So I was his backup on 11. And that put us in line to fly Apollo 14, because you normally cycle 3 crews, three missions. And what happened is two of the members of the crew that were on Apollo 10 assigned to move to then 13 had not trained for mission. Al Shepard and Stu Russa had never served in the backup, and Al Shepard had not flown in quite a while. He had had the medical problem and had been reinstated, so he had not been in any training at all. And so Deke was sort of overruled, I think, by NASA headquarters, and wanted to give them more training time So Deke called in Lovell and Jim and asked him if he'd fly 13, move a mission ahead. So Jim naturally said, yeah, we'll fly 13. That's great. We'll get to fly sooner. So that's how we ended up, the only time that was done, we moved the mission ahead of the one we were supposed to fly. So we were going to fly 14 and we ended up flying 13.
And being a backup on 11, of course, the significance of that, you back up on 8, first trip to the moon, back up on 11, the first landing. So you trained everything that they were going to do on that flight to be the first to land.
Right.
On 11.
Yeah, but those are interesting because, again, they were sort of each in their own right. Development of specific mission rules, specific contingency procedures, those kinds of things. So it was really getting the book sort of pretty much done for what followed later, for all the flights later. It still had some minor refinements, but basically those are the milestone programs that kind of set the things in place for what followed for all the missions.
Yeah, but amazing to be associated with those missions. And then 13. 13 comes, the one that led to so much, the book, the movie. I remember as a kid hearing about what you guys went through. Take us through that, the lead up to 13, and then what happened? What was that like? And going to the moon, but the whole bit, which has become such a historic, significant story for all of us.
Well, 13 had a unusual thing. The only time it ever happened, in the week of launch, we were all primary and backup crew. We were all exposed to German measles. So it was COVID again, a different COVID virus.